And the sex worker was like, I want to be called a sex worker. I need that to be on my form. The healthcare provider said, well, I'm putting ill, so if you don't want the service, then you can leave. And they don't care.
I felt the eyes, the curious mind.
I really hope people leave with a more complicated and a more nuanced sense of kind of what it is that sex workers are demanding around the world.
Let's get this show on the road. Welcome again to Sex Workers Pop-Up. I have 4 lovely panelists here ready to share their experiences with you. Marina Avermecano is 54-year-old, a sex worker living in Russia. Before sex work, she was a lawyer for over 20 years. She advises sex workers on law and security and has won cases in the Russian courts. We have Jules Kim, is a Korean-Australian sex worker and the Chief Executive Officer of Scarlett Alliance, Australian Sex Workers Association, and the chairperson of the Asian Pacific Network for Sex Workers, APNSW. Then we have the fabulous Shaunna-May Trotman, is a 41-year-old from Guyana. She is a member of the Guyana Sex Work Coalition and sits on the board of the Caribbean Sex Workers Coalition. Nina Lowe is a fellow at Data for Programs, organizer, media strategist, and author of the report Decriminalizing Survival, previously a Vocal NY. She led prosecutor accountability and sex worker rights campaign. Nita is a founding member of the both Decrim NY and Survivor Against SESTA. Welcome. Why is sex work?
This is a service that is being provided to customers, and they are being paid for that service. We should be entitled to the same benefits, the same retirement like every other worker.
I plan my work, I plan my working time, I plan my week, my time off. I have my own business plan, so I plan how much money I need to earn. I'm also trying to invest into education. Basically, sex work is work like any other work.
The issues that we might face in our work are issues that other workers face as well. So, you know, we can have good working conditions or we can have bad working conditions. It is a labour issue. I mean, immediately the first thought is to save us from sex work. The issue isn't that we want to leave our jobs, and sometimes maybe we do want to leave our jobs, and we should be able to do that. The best way to protect the rights of sex workers is to decriminalise sex work so that we can get protection from the labour protections that other workers enjoy.
What are the current policies in your country?
I'm from Guyana, and I represent the Caribbean, but in Guyana, there's no law attached to sex work, but there the laws that surrounds it, like soliciting, loitering, living off the earnings of sex workers, that is criminalized. So we don't have a law that directly hits sex work, but everything around it.
In Russia, there are criminal laws for pimping, for organizing sex work, and for involving people into sex work. However, if you are doing sex work, you are prosecuted just with a fine which amounts to $25–30.
So the laws in the US are pretty complicated. It varies like city to city and then state to state. With the exception of Nevada, where there are a couple of specific brothels, sex work is criminalized everywhere else. Selling sex is criminalized, buying sex is criminalized, and then any working with, associating with, living with, or facilitating sex work is also criminalized. It is possible that you could receive a felony charge for promoting prostitution if you just have a roommate who is a sex worker and you like open the door to a client or drive them to a date. The people who are most highly criminalized for sex work, Black and Latinx women, especially trans women, and then also immigrants, including Asian migrants working in massage parlors. These are people that are going to be criminalized either way. Like people either get a sex work charge or they get a drug charge, or they get both, or they get a loitering charge, or they get a trespass charge. So It's really a larger web of criminalization that isn't just prostitution, even if prostitution is one of the things that people get.
Sex work was first decriminalised in the world in New South Wales, where I currently live and work, and that was in 1995. We also had the most recent jurisdiction to decriminalise sex work in the Northern Territory. Unfortunately, it's only the third jurisdiction in the world that has decriminalised sex work. Also in other states, we're criminalised, and you know, a sex worker doesn't have the right to remain silent. Condoms are used as evidence against us. And there's a range of really discriminatory laws.
How do these laws affect sex workers' health and safety?
The bigger problem is that when you are arrested for sex work, the information is databased and is stored in the database forever. What is more, this database is easily accessible. And we know about cases when people were willing to quit sex work and they would try to find an employment, and then the employer would look through the police database and will discover that the person did sex work, and this person would get sacked, and the employer would say we don't need prostitutes, even though this person was charged once 10 years before this situation.
So a lot of people are engaging in some kind of sex trade or work, not just like in your mind, you know, a high-class escort or whatever image. It's a type of labor that is low barrier because you don't necessarily need documentation status or to send out a resume to do the work, and it's fast. So think about like who needs like cash quickly. It's often people who are experiencing poverty, homelessness, or like other forms of discrimination in the workplace. Criminalization just makes all those things worse. Like whatever reason you're doing sex work in the first place, criminalization makes even worse. When people go through really disruptive like arrest, incarceration, sometimes deportation cycles, which can also include criminal records, they often lose their housing, they can lose their children, you can lose your day job that you were working, you can lose the healthcare that you once had access to. When people experience criminalization, they really come out much, much worse.
Now, in my country, we hardly ever get a case to go to court. In Guyana, you don't go to the police station, period, with your sex workers' issues. They either laugh at you, try to get sex with you, and then ask you to leave. So we don't get a hearing, period. That's one. Two, for example, in Antigua, sex workers are only allowed a few amount of condoms. One of my colleagues said to me, I had to wash my condom. Sex workers are reusing condoms. And that is because of the law that is surrounded in Antigua. And the cost for a condom in the mining areas are $5 US. I can remember one of my colleagues saying to me that healthcare provider asked her, so what do you do? I'm a sex worker. And the healthcare provider looked at her and said, I can't put that down. And she put nils. And the sex worker was like, I want to be called a sex worker. I need that to be on my form. The healthcare provider said, well, I'm putting nil. So if you don't want the service, then you can leave.
I wanted to touch a bit on how problematic legalisation or licensing is for sex workers as well. Basically, has a set of laws that most sex workers can't comply with. So by default, the majority of sex workers are criminalised because you're working outside of this narrow legal framework. You need to register. This registration stays with you even after you die. You can never remove your name off the register. And it impacts sex workers in trying to get other jobs or in child custody cases, in completely unrelated ways. What it does is criminalise our safety structures. So it forces sex workers to have to work alone, and they have mandatory testing, which is an enormous waste of public resources. Mandatory testing, that makes sense. We should get sex workers should be tested regularly, but these certificates are quite meaningless. In a decriminalised framework where sex workers test voluntarily, in fact, they have better health outcomes. Where sex work is legalised and we're forced to line up in a clinic, so there'd be a line around the block, and if we actually have an accident at work, we can't get into the clinic because there's all these other sex workers there that are lining up for this meaningless certificate, which only kind of says that you've tested clean at that test in that period of time.
Why is law reform essential to sex workers?
We're often having to prioritise police evasion over our safety strategies at work. And if we need protection from the laws, we're not able to access them without fearing that we might get arrested for being a sex worker. Sex workers are entitled to the same human rights and protections as every other citizen.
I don't want to be criminalized. I would like to have an opportunity to go to police, not to be charged, but to press charges against the offender. I don't want to have to choose between providing money or having my identity disclosed. I want to work safely.
Decriminalization is important because it is part of our larger conversation around why are we spending so much money and effort on criminalizing people instead of giving them resources. The United States has 4% of the world's population, but 25% of the world's prison population. So obviously we've decided as a society it's appropriate to target very specific communities, those communities being poor people, people of color, immigrant, LGBTQ people, with harassment, arrest, incarceration, and then deportation. Like that's what we've collectively decided is an appropriate way to deal with various social health public issues. I think decriminalization is of sex work, which is one thing, is really just one part of a much larger conversation about how we can really decarcerate entire communities.
Thank you so much.